I was born over in the Flint area in 1933, and it was a bad year because the folks were losing the house that year.
Yep.
So I had two other brothers, and they didn't want another son, but I had one, that's me. Then they lost the house, and we moved around quite a bit, farmed and so on, and lived up in Grand Blanc. Then I got drafted in 1953, and then come back, and I got married when I was in the Army. I'm telling everybody that my wife wouldn't marry me until I got drafted. Then once I got drafted, I learned how to take orders from everybody, then she married me. So, that's one of those things that's in the training program. Yeah, I didn't have a chance all my life. Yep, no ma'am, yep, okay. But when
Women
we
are
got
like
the
that.
stores, she let me be the boss. But the minute we come home, she was the boss, so I knew that. But anyway, that's kind of my life story, and I've been here all this time, and Eva Larson and Mrs. Kimball, way back in the 60s and 70s, 1960s and 70s, they had with the old schoolhouses out there, they had not Oak Grove, but one down, I forget the name of the road, but down there was, anyway, she had kind of a museum out there. And she was just kind of going out at that time. I think that was the first township hall in Croton at that time. And so she was kind of going out, and so she gave all this information to my wife, who was going to use it. But we never, things went on and never had a chance to use it until a couple weeks ago. And yeah, Carol asked me if we could dig up some of that stuff and find out what it was like. I don't know everything about Croton, but what I do know, I'll kind of give you an idea, and if you think I'm wrong, well, tell me. What can I say? And well, let's go back, to start with, let's go back thousands of years. I know Croton was just a wilderness then, trees all over the place, who knows what was here. They found a mastodon skeleton some 20, 30 years ago over near Lansing in that area, so they must have wandered through here too. All the wolves and coyotes and fox and lynx and everything. This is kind of a rough area. So as time went on, the Native Americans kind of moved in, and they had all the way through here. They had camps, and of course where the two rivers come together. Why not have a nice camp there? Because they can fish both ways. And so then as time went on, then the white settlers come in, the Europeans come in. I guess in about 1836. Up by Oxbow, they had a French Indian trading post, and that might have been there from the 1820s, I don't know. But by the time they started coming through here in Croton, it was in 1837, and that was just as Michigan became a state. And they didn't like Michigan because it was swampy, mosquitoes. And that's why every other, Ohio, Illinois, those didn't become states back in the early 1800s. And Michigan wasn't until 1837. But by 1837, all of a sudden, logging was become very important because they cut off all the logs back in the east and so on and up to this point, and Michigan was a great place for logging. So they started coming up here about 1847, 1846 when they first come up here. Brooks, like Brooks Township in Nuevo, he was one of the men. Stearns, I think it was William Stearns or John Stearns, he was one of them also. And they looked at this area where they come together, and they decided that they should put a sawmill there. So they didn't do anything to the big mosquito. This is an old map when they one of the things she gave me. This is an old map of when they platted out Croton. You can see where Croton was. I live right over here in this area, up on top of the hill from then. But the Muskegon was just Muskegon, and they dammed up the little Muskegon, so it made a kind of a pond there. And this is where they had the sawmill, so they cut the logs and they bring them down there, and they had to haul them a long ways. Back then, to go to Muskegon, it took 4 days by canoe or boat, flatboat. I mean, it took a long time to go someplace. And that was just a little town. And to get supplies, it says in all the books that to get supplies from Grand Rapids, it took, 2 or 3 days by oxen, and there wasn't any trails. But the old animals made the trails around, and they tried to keep out of sight, so somebody tried to stay and survive. That was their main thing. So they went around swamps and so on and such. So And Indians come along, so they come along and they follow the same trails. Well, then the settlers come in, they follow the same trails, they made it a little bit bigger. And then pretty soon the cars and so on, and they paved them such, but how many animals walk the trails from Nuevo up to here? And how many carts and so on and so on? You just gotta think about these things, that what they was been like back in those days. So anyway, these guys, they built a sawmill, and they built a bridge across the river the next year. Well, the next year the bridge washed out, probably the Muskegon River washed out, so they had to build another bridge. And that lasted for about 18 years, I guess, until that washed out. And then they had to, in about 1869, they built an iron bridge. And there's some pictures of the old iron bridge here. And that's the one that they need repairs in about 1869, 1890, someplace in there, in that area. It needed repairs, so they got it floated up, and that's when it floated away from them. Got a big storm and it floated away from them, and floated where it is right now. And that it got caught there on the sides of the banks and so on. So they anchored it right there, and that's where the bridge is now. As we've been coming across that bridge for 100 and some years. That's where nature put it, and that's where they weren't going to put it, because they had that big hill. They had to get the old. You can see the old trail that goes around, along by the dam there, the river, the old road. Then they decided, I guess, later on in the 40s or 30s, to go up over the top of the hill, where the road goes now. So it was quite a feat back in those days.
There's still an iron bridge down on the river?
No, that's gone.
Oh, okay.
They replaced that. When we got here, though,
I remember the old iron bridge.
there was an iron bridge.
I thought you were saying it
yeah, they just
floated down.
replaced it within the last 40 years, something like that.
Right.
And what's 40 years in time? You can think back 40 years ago. We all can. So anyway, and the Croton started to grow some at that time. They didn't have a name or anything. It was just where the two rivers come together, so they called it the Forks, which was a good idea, I guess. That everybody knew where the forks were. So then maybe John Stearns anyway, bought the mill, Stearns Mill. So they decided to let's call it Stearns Mill, the area there, which they did. So it started to be a little settlement at that time, so that was Stearns Mill. And Stearns, after he owned it, therefore he became postmaster, and in about 1849, and he says that, I don't like Stearns Mill for a name. I want to name this after Croton. He came from Croton on the Hudson, which was Croton on the Hudson in New York, was a big shipping area, had a big aqueduct there. And that aqueduct supplied all the water to New York at the time of the Revolution. So they had a lot of battles there back and forth between the British and the Americans, who's going to control the water going into New York. So the Americans won, so I guess they won everything then, so we know that's how that worked out. But anyway, this is how the name Croton come up. He wanted to name it Croton after his hometown. So that's about 170 years ago we called it Croton. And can you imagine those guys back in that day? No food, no nothing. They had to raise their own. They had to have what they call bees. They had a cutting bee. They all got together, and they cut 4 acres in one day. They cut it, and then the guy had to pull the stumps, and they had animals and cows. So all the trees that they had in the limbs, they just put these here limbs together, and they made what's called a brush fence. Then after they cut the logs down and cut them up into pieces, well then they ended up with these kind of logs that they would put together and made a log fence out of it. And so that's how these fences come. They kept the cows, because the cows back then everything was wood, trees, and so on. There's forests here, and so the cows would wander around, and there were a lot of leeks. This is a kind of a plant that kind of resembles a onion, yeah, but it's got a real strong smell to it, and that's what the cows would eat. So the people would milk the cows. Everything tastes like leek. They make butter. Butter tastes like leeks. Pretty soon they all smell like leeks. So can you imagine Of course, you always hear about some of these old guys take a bath twice a year, that's enough, you know. But here we have water, so maybe it took maybe 3 or 4 times a year, but can you imagine the smell of leaves and no deodorant, you know how that goes back then.
Mosquitoes probably didn't bug you.
That makes me laugh too to think about them. But back in the 1837, when they came in here, they didn't come in here because there were so many mosquitoes. They just swarms of mosquitoes. They didn't know what to do with all of them. They just couldn't get away from them. And they were gnats that flew all over the place. They just made almost like a cloud when they flew up. So these guys were terrible trying to, in the summertime or the springtime, trying to get away from these. And I guess we get a mosquito bite or scare a fly away. How does 1,000 of them up there? How are you going to do that? So they would go into their shanties, have a pan, and right in the middle of the shanties, they'd build a little fire. And they would have this little fire and this pan in there. And they would put leaves, grass leaves or leaves on it, something green, make a lot of smoke. And that would drive the mosquitoes out. And I don't know in the flies, but I don't know what would be better, the mosquitoes or the flies or the smoke. But they did burn out a lot of places because they were not very good. Yeah, I mean, they were not very careful, but they weren't very good places to begin with. Most of them weren't. So, but anyway, the pioneers, they had it pretty tough, and they were going someplace. They did share everything with everybody. They shared oxen, they shared all their tools, they shared all their food, they shared everything with everybody. So, in order to be able to live in this area at that time, because there was nothing around, period. So the town was platted out in about 1854, and that's what this map is here. That's what this map is here, and it shows all the pond, the little pond, and it shows this part up here. We're up in the hill, they call it, and these were the flats down here, this lower spot, and there was no dam here, so this was all open property, and it flourished for quite a while. And as they went through the time and years, there's a lot of hotels that were built there. Yeah. I think about 4 or 5 hotels or more. And they had a lot of bars. They had a lot of stables, a lot of homes. Quite a few body houses too for the lumberjacks, you know. As they what in 1850, what do they care? So anyway, they had all these things. As a matter of fact, talking about body houses, at the end of, this is Division, that's Wealthy Street over here. At the end of Wealthy Street, there's a house there, big pillars and so on, Mowers lived there now. And that was an old hotel, an old body house, way back 150 years ago. And across from the Croton Dam store, on an angle like that there's an old house there, kind of up shared at the end of the church parking lot. That was an old hotel, an old body house too. So they were there. And I don't know why they call that one Wealthy Street at the end, but I guess that was something they decided to do. So anyway, as town kept growing on and lumbering was pretty heavy, sometimes they would have millions of board feet of lumber coming down through this through here, and they had to mark them all. So they would take this stick with leaves on the end of it, and this big hammer with their brand, and hold it against the log and whack that thing really hard and make an indentation in the leaves and the juice. They were kind of keep it so as they floated it downstream, you're talking millions of logs going downstream, and there's not one way you could ever say that's my log, without being able to prove it's your log. So they did a great way of doing things, and I imagine a lot of them were, you know, rustled like everything else. You know, people are that way. So they come up with stuff like that in order to protect their property and their money and so on. And if somebody got sick, there was always somebody. There's always somebody that would stay with them because there was no doctors around or anybody. I mean, if you got sick, you got sick. That was, you had to cure your own self. And no doctors, so they had midwives, and the midwife went from place to place, and they had a lot of deaths at that time too, and living up here, you know, different diseases. And if you died, one day they build a coffin, they bury you the next day. Nobody sitting around, staying around. And that they had about 4 graveyards in the community, in the area, in the township. At one time, this half of Nuevo County was two townships, Brooks Township and Croton Township. And so then they start cutting them up and they give everybody different entities and everybody different townships and give us the size we are today. So I mean, everything was so much, everything was step by step back in those days. And we're talking about loggers. In the old house, this guy right here, his name is David, you may look at his book later, David Rice. And his dad came here in the 1840s, and he was a logger also. And he bought sections of land, and he owned sawmills and so on. Well, David Rice was a logger too, in a lumberjack. So we was up in the attic, my dad was one day, picked up a board, and underneath that board was old David Rice's knife. You've seen all these pictures of all these lumberjacks running around the woods with the long knives hanging out. And this is what it is. This is his knife, this is their knife. And this is a beautiful old knife. It's not very sharp, but this is probably, the Indians tanned all the deer skin and so on like that, so this is probably a deer skin. This is probably about 150 years old. I don't know if you wanna, nobody's ever held one, nobody's ever seen one before, let alone held one. I don't know if you just pass that around, kind of give you an idea what they were like.
You found that in your house?
In the house, yeah, that was David Rice's old, he wore it, and what happened is, they were pretty prosperous. He was a merchant downtown and in the village of Croton, and then all of a sudden the fire came along, and then there was nothing. So everybody was pretty poor. So he probably, matter of fact, he had a great house there at one time, but this is how the house ended up in about 1910 or 12. It just ready to fall apart, and you can see all the chimneys, all the fireplaces they had in it. It was 2-story, so I guess they had, I don't know, 5, 6, 7 kids.
Is that your house now?
That's my house now, it is now, and one of them drowned in the Muskegon River. 2 or 3 of them died in one day, almost one day of some disease. And then they buried them all in the same grave. So there's a lot of things that, history that you don't even think about that these guys had to go through. And so that's one of but the knife is one of the things that really surprises me, just to see one, let alone hold one. And I don't know what they use, protection? Get away from me, or here comes a bear or something, or I want to chop this tree, that's my tree. I don't know how they did what they did, but it was quite interesting to see how they did all that stuff. And the bridges, let's see here, in John Boiler. He came here in 1846, and he was a merchant, and he stayed here. I don't know. There was a school, well, by Oak Grove School there in that area. I won't remember the name of the roads on it, but he was a builder, as a store out there one time. And he went out there in the early 1900s after the fire started the store out there. But his dad was here in the 1846. And I can see him maybe standing right in this very spot, reaching in his pocket, pulling out his watch, his pocket watch, which is probably 100, 200, maybe 150, 200 years old. You got this key on it, you don't wind it. You gotta put this key in there and crank it and wind it up. But he probably looked at the watch as well, it's 12 o'clock, time to go home. Put the watch back in his watch pocket, back in the, I don't know why they make watch pockets nowadays. I haven't seen anybody reach in a watch pocket for 60, 70 years. But they're still there. But anyway, some of these things, and another thing is that back then, you guys wanted a haircut, or cut your beard, you took one of these guys here, and that's what they shave you with. Cut you like that, just cut your hair cut. No electric. And I imagine if it was dull, it probably pulled a little bit too.
So what year did it burn?
Pardon?
What year did that Croton burn the first time?
1890, 97 or 99. It's different. I think 1899. I believe it was the time it burned. And what happened is that supposedly, there was a hotel there. Because the logging had run out. There was no, they cut all the logs back as far as they could in the Little Muskegon, away from the water, they couldn't slide them down when they had, so they come up with these little trains that run around there anymore, and got all the water, all the logs, all the way up to, in 40 years, all the way up to Houghton Lake, or Higgins Lake in that area, so there was not much coming down. So the men were out trying to scramble, trying to make all the money they could to live on, and then a fire broke out. And supposedly, it was in April, and it was a pretty windy day, I guess, and it's a south wind, so it come from this here way, and it started burning up at the Croton Road up there, on the other, on the church on this side, and the other side was pretty well burned out, and all the way down. In about 2 hours, there was nobody around, because all the men were gone, and nobody was to put out the fire, so the fire just burned itself out. Burned down some, I think it was 28, something like that, businesses, and just so many houses, there was nothing left out there. So by that time, it was pretty well gone.
Where was it?
Pardon?
Where was the town?
Okay, if you stand here, let's go over to Breezy Isle. You stand on Breezy Isle, and you look out that way, over to towards the west. All that out there was town. Well, there was 500 some people lived in it at one time. So it was a big thing. I don't know how many people live in Nuevo, just itself, inside the city itself, but that's what that was. So it's probably about the size. Anyway, at one time, Croton was the largest town north of Grand Rapids in Michigan.
Wow.
Because it was big. It was just bigger than Nuevo. The only reason that Nuevo is bigger and better and what have you than Croton today is because when they built the train right straight through. It went to Grant, Nuevo, White Cloud, and so on. They skipped Croton. So Croton kind of died on the vine.
The Stagecoach Road, in Croton, when that's the Stagecoach Road, Big Rapids?
Oh, they did. They run it every, I think every 4 days they did it. Every 4 days. That took them a whole day and a half or something. Ensley Center was pretty popular. They did that far because you got to remember the roads weren't that good. And a lot of the roads we were talking about swamps and so on. When they came up to a swamp, what did they do? They couldn't drive through it, and they couldn't have enough to haul dirt or anything in, so they cut logs down. They laid them boom, 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 like that, and then put some dirt over the top of them, but they were still, when they went over, they called corduroy roads. They went over the top of them, and it was really a tough way to go, but at least they could get through the swamps. So it was pretty rough area at that time. I mean, today, we come home from work, Brad put the car in the garage, go home, unlock the door, go in there, turn the lights on, put something on the TV, put something in the oven, turn the lights on, they didn't have that stuff those days. They got home from logging maybe 12, 14 hours a day. What did they have to do? Go build a fire someplace. Go find something to eat. Maybe it's just beans, or maybe it's just mush. Who knows what they ate? And I suppose, like every place else, the deer and the wild game probably evaporated pretty soon. I mean, we lived here for 40 years, that many people. And the loggers, they were always very hungry and thirsty, I'm told. So that's one of those things. But it's very nice to think that, and most of the loggers, they were paid $30 and stay up in Big Rapids area along the most of these towns you see nowadays through central Michigan were just where they built shanties, where they had a logging camp for a short time, then they moved on. And sometimes they stayed, sometimes they didn't. Sometimes they're just ghost towns or something. But and Croton became a ghost town for a while, but then they built the dam, and here we are. It's just a great place to live. Let's see here. Yeah, and now, like I say, if you look out there, you don't drive across the causeway. There's only 2 causeways in this part of Michigan, over by Muskegon and this causeway here. And if you drive across the causeway, you just look at the water, you don't think about it. But out there, you think about 150 years ago, all the people that made a living out there, all the people that flourished out there, all the goodies that were sold. And when the fire burned, it burned all the merchants out. And this one guy, he just got a whole year's supply of clothing in there. And really that stuff was pretty expensive at that time. See if I can find a price on it here, some of these things.
No, we didn't have insurance.
They were. All right. In 1867, I mean, gee, you're ahead of myself. A pound of tea would cost $2. That's pretty expensive back then.
Yeah.
Everybody, a lot of people drank tea. And coffee was 40 cents a pound. So nobody drank coffee, they drank tea.
Huh.
And cheese was 25 cents a pound. Sugar was 7 cents a pound. Now, I would think sugar would be more expensive, but I don't know, it's not. Pork was $6.75 a carrot, CW carrot weight. And I don't know if that's that would be a so many pound, I forget what that is. Anybody know what CWT stands for? I think that's not a pound, it's a little bit more than a pound, I think. And salt was $1 a barrel, and soap was 15 cents a bar, plug tobacco was 50 cents. So if you smoked back then, just like today, it's expensive to smoke today, jeez. And because you only made what, maybe $1 a day or less. So you spend all that money on tobacco, that'd be bad. And 50 pounds of flour was $3.75. 1 hank of black thread was 10 cents. So they could make some clothes. And a pair of boots was $7. So if you had, you had to work a long time to buy a good pair of boots, but you had to have good boots, had to have good shoes to walk around this country, because it's not all, paved like it is, level like it is now. Your rocks, sticks, stones, who knows what down you're gonna step on. And a boy's hat was $1. So I think we buy a lot of hats today for $1. And cinnamon was 20 cents a pound, of course, and 2 pen holders and 3 pens was 8 cents. And that's all everybody did communicating with. And 2 chimney lamps and 1 ball and wax candle wax was 50 cents, and that was their. I mean, it got dark. It got dark early this time of year. You went to bed earlier. You spent a lot of money on wax can. And a box of hairpins was 5 cents, and 1 cant hook. You guys know all what a cant hook is, don't you? That's the one they rolled along, with the long one about so long, and they got a hook on it, it flopped back and forth, they stick it on there and put that in and roll the logs over. So, yeah, all that stuff was very expensive back in those days. I don't know, it's just one of the things that happened in Croton that we think is just a town, just a village, just a place to live, but it has a lot of history. And I'm just touching on it. There's so much history that you just can't believe. And every one of you has probably got stories of history of Croton yourself and who lived here and where you lived. And would be nice if sometime we could all put it together. Maybe everybody can write down the history, we can put a little pamphlet and maybe pass it around to the people and other parts of the county too, so they know what we did here in Croton.
Do you know when the wooden schoolhouse was built, where the brick schoolhouse is now, Oak Grove? Do you know when the wooden one was built?
When it was built?
On the wooden one?
I don't think that was built, it was back in the 1800s, but I think 1880s and 1890s. This schoolhouse over here, you know where this one is?
Yeah.
That was the first one, and that was built, right around that time too.
Oh.
And I've got pictures of it here, the girls standing there in front of the school in 1912. Let's see, they would be, how old would they be today if they were, they'd be 130 years old today. If they were
Mine
still
was
here.
built in 1906,
Well, that 1906,
Oak Grove School.
Oak Grove
Yeah.
School was, yeah, I wasn't sure about that one.
I've got some pictures of it when it was first built.
Okay, very good.
There's a book about one-room schoolhouses out in Nuevo County, you can get at the library, but the Oak Grove is a 2-room schoolhouse.
Okay, it's a pretty school. Oak Grove was the biggest, had the biggest library.
Yeah?
They had, some of the schools didn't have any books in their libraries. They had to go to Oak Grove School and just find out what's going on in the world. And, of course, back then, we turn on the TV, we know what's happening over in Africa, we know what's happening over in Europe in a second. But back then, it took months to know what's happening any place. So, yeah.
So what about the building behind your old store? I call it the castle over on Lakeshore there, Lakeshore and Markley.
That was Wrigley's. Wrigley Field, Wrigley chewing gum and so on. He had a big house up here at one time, back in the 20s, I think, maybe before. And he built that big building, they call it the haunted castle, people noted, cause it just stood there by itself and just looked haunted all the time, and it kinda slowly went into the ground after, for 50, 60 years, it looked kinda tough here about 25, 30 years ago, when somebody else bought it and fixed it up. But he kept all those old boats in there, all those old cars
Was
in
it
there.
a stable at one time, a horse stable? That's what I always heard.
It probably was, it's part of it, I mean,
Carriage
it's so
on.
big, have you ever been inside of it?
Oh, yeah,
Yeah, I have.
as a
too.
kid, I was
And
a lot.
it's a big building, a lot of room.
We're not gonna ask what you were doing.
Yeah. I remember a lot of old cars being in there.
Oh, yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, they, were quite interesting, it just surprised you, some of the history of it. And they tell me a lot of times the gangsters in Chicago and Detroit would come up here, hide until the heat's off back there. And then they go back again, and all of a sudden they got liking it up here, so up they come, they start coming up here on vacation. And they had some nice places, and up here they felt safe and so on, and until they went back, and maybe they never left again, I don't know. But, yeah, so it was a lot of history and stuff like that there that you don't really know about. Nobody ever talks about it. And you don't even talk about history of Croton, because, we just live here and that's all we think about it. But you dig into it, and like I say, we've all got stories, and if you got some stories you'd like to, give, well, Carol said she would take care of them, and she'd get them all printed up, and we could put them in a pamphlet, and we'd all know our family history, and even if you're not really from Croton, like you said, you're from, Bill's Lake, there's a lot of history about Bill's Lake too. And, I'm sure they cut a lot of lumber around that, until, it just quit, no more lumber. What they did, they started someplace like down along the river, and they kept cutting back. So as long as they could drag them in, that's fine. And then they would have what they call the high rollaways, where they'd keep them up there in the summertime, and they would cut them, get them all ready to go. Then in the winter, or in the spring, when the rains came, and the water was all coming down like a crazy rush, and then they would throw them over these rollaways, and they would roll individually down there, hit the water and float downstream. But then sometimes they get, log jams, and when they get these log jams, they had to have these guys, they call them special guys, I'm not sure what the names are now, but they call these guys to go out there, and they had to ride these logs all the way down to Muskegon, and they had to sleep on these logs at night. And so they had
Cool.
I'm talking about a tough job or a dangerous job, that would be bad, wouldn't it?
Probably
I can't see myself doing that myself, but, I mean, I can't, I've seen these people get out there, they try to walk on a log spinning and so on, and, can you imagine a million of them? If you fall off, you're done.
Get your foot between them.
Is anybody else got any questions out there they'd like to share, come up with? How about your family, where'd they come from?
Well, I'm from Grant originally, but I bought the Peacock Farm 28 years ago. I dug up some stuff on that. That was called Ryan's Corners. A guy named Ryan bought it in 1848, and that was a stagecoach stop from Grand Rapids to Big Rapids, which Big Rapids wasn't called Big Rapids then, it was, started with an L, I can't remember.
Leonard.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep,
Leonard.
yep.
Yeah, I'll be there. How about your family, where they?
Well, I'm
Started
from
out.
Grand Rapids, but I kinda migrated up about 12 years ago, 15 years ago.
Okay, yeah, well, that's, how far back have you dug into your family, your genealogy?
I haven't.
Yeah.
My family's been up here, my Uncle Mart used to run a little boat shop where, the hairdressing place is over on Mart Hoffmeyer. And then he was married to my aunt Lorraine,
Okay,
and they lived right there on Front Street,
sure.
yeah.
Yeah, that's.
So
What was that called?
the boat shop?
Yeah.
I'm not really sure, his name was Mart Hoffmeyer, and he just fixed boat motors there. There's the hairdresser, and then right next door, there's a new little shop. He was right in there.
Oh, okay. When
Yeah.
was that?
Oh, man, it was when I was very young, probably in the early 60s, late 50s.
Okay.
Cause I grew up in my aunt's house there on Front Street, so I was there as a baby in 56. And then, as I grew up, she got married to Mart and he had that boat shop, yeah.
I bought Roy Ferguson's old place, I live up on the High Bank.
Yeah.
And just down the street from that is Sailor's Pines.
Yes.
So the Sailor's family bought it, must have done a lot of logging around here, but he had 40 acres of pine that wasn't cut. So he kind of donated that acreage to the community. And there's a 2-track that goes around it. But in the corner of my property, there's a great big iron pipe. That's not round, but it's, I don't know, fluted like. And I think there used to be a wheel on that, and they used to use that to drag trees down to the
Yes.
river
yes,
somehow.
That's what they would use for the high
That's
roadways,
cool.
yes. Uh-huh.
I thought, man, I can use that like a tree, man. I tried pulling and digging on it a little bit, but it's not gonna move.
So, yeah, and you know,
That's
there's
cool.
been a lot of people up here, I was reading one of these articles there that said that there was a lieutenant and a captain that came up here, and the lieutenant's name was Lieutenant Leavenworth. So you've heard of Fort Leavenworth and,
Oh, yeah.
or the prison, Leavenworth prison and so on, so a lot of famous people came through Croton here. We don't, you know, and nobody knows about it, nobody, you know, there's no big sign out saying what a town this was at one time. What a happy place, I don't know if it's happy or not.
What about that regiment? That paper that you have about the regiment?
About the what?
The regiment.
Army regiment.
Oh, yes, just forgot about that, yes. Anyway,
This is cool too.
that is good, isn't it? There's a paper in here, in the back part of it, that authorizes this guy, and I'm not sure who it is, maybe you can read it yourself here, but authorizes this guy to raise a company of recruits for the Civil War.
Oh.
And the only qualification they had to have, if they could hit a target at 200 yards. They didn't care what they looked like or who they were, as long as they hit a target at 200 yards. So they raised them, so they raised an army, yes. I mean, a company probably from the area, and big enough. And,
Did they
how many
stay
people
here?
that live here now that don't know they had ancestors that lived way back then.
Was there a camp then for them?
Not here, no.
Okay.
My this was in 1861. My great granddad, he lived over in the Linden area, Fenton area, right, Flint, and he joined the Michigan 3rd Cavalry. And he was there for a short time. Then they came over here to Grand Rapids, down by Grand Rapids, and the camp down there is where they trained. And he was in the cavalry for 4 years, 3 years, and he made it through. He left a diary, left a lot of battles, saying how many people were killed in each battle, how many were wounded, and how many taken prisoner, and so on. So it's very interesting to read that stuff. So you should definitely dig into your genealogy and find out where you came from, who you are.
I'm in the Daughters of the American Revolution, so we can help with that genealogy. I traced one of my ancestors back to the last stop on the Underground Railroad. He had a house that he got the horses out, upstate New York,
Sure.
and
Cool.
took him to Canada overnight. They kicked him out of his church because of his
Oh, yeah.
activities in the Underground Railroad. It was against the law back then.
Things were different, you bet. Yeah. How about your family? Where'd they come from?
Well, actually, Grand Rapids area.
From the area? Okay.
They had a little town in, Talmadge Township, and down in, just north of Grand Rapids, and had a little shop there. Kind of migrated up here, so, get
Okay.
away from the Grand Rapids hustle and bustle.
Yeah.
Then you dug into your genealogy too. huh?
Not as
Not
far
as
as,
much.
some of my other relatives have,
I
but.
think there's some free ancestry.com has something for free right now, or it was around Christmas time. I don't know if it still is right now, but it's easy to go to most of the libraries and look that up.
Sure. How about way in the back? Where'd you guys come from? Yeah, yeah.
Well, I moved up here about 10 years ago.
Okay.
So I don't know a lot of history. I don't have a lot of family. I grew up around Kansas City.
Okay,
So I come here to learn.
all right. How about the lady in front of you there?
Me? Oh, I've been up here for 25 years.
Yes.
I'm on Front Street. And then some friends of mine bought the property from Front Street to Croton Hardy Road, and that's where the Indian mounds are,
Okay.
in there.
So you know a little bit of what history, what went on before.
Mhm.
And when I got here, there was quite a few old, like Mr. Hayes, right across from the Croton Dam, or we call it Croton Dam store. He was, from, Ohio, and one of his relatives were President Hayes. You look just like him too, when you see him. You think, oh, be darned.
Which neighbors were up here, Ottawa, Chippewa?
Pardon?
Ottawa or Chippewa, or, I know Potawatomi's a little farther south.
Yeah, otherwise, I don't know them all, but, this one lady here, Miss Connie, was from out,
Yeah.
Indiana, and she, she had a hard time towards the end, and my wife would, she'd call the store, my wife would take her groceries and so on. And so, towards the end there, she'd give my wife this little purse that she had. You've seen these little Indian beaded purse, they're so long, they're all beads, they got sprinkles on the bottom, and then, they probably made it herself. I remember coming in the store, going to buy some food, she'd dig her purse out, open that little, dig in there, get her money out. She gave that to my wife, and I since then gave it to one of my granddaughters. They like history, so I know they would take care of stuff like that, so. So there's a lot of history up here. A lot of other people in the 70s, people in 76, there was a lot of people in their 80s that were living here that were born back in the 1800s. Now you go 1800s, 1900s, 2000.
Wow.
That's 3 centuries ago. So it's nice to know those people. And this David Rice, that house I live in over there, he died in 1915, and I was born in 33. So he was an early settler from, I don't know when he was born, but probably back in the early 1830s, something like that. And he was just born 20 years before I was born. He died 20 years before I was born. So, there's a lot of stuff, history that I just missed. And the same way as you guys, there's so much history out there that you should really dig into it. And if we all get together, I think Carol is kind of a good idea about coming up with a pamphlet on this stuff so we all have a good, pass it on to our grandkids and our kids and so on. Yeah, and yeah. So anybody else got any questions that you'd like to know about Croton? Some things I probably went over and didn't think about, but I know when people were traveling, they were really neighborly people. And if you were going someplace and you couldn't get there in one day, and you come across the cabin, you'd ask if you could sleep there, you could sleep there. They would put you up, they would give you food, and you sleep on a straw bed. The only thing was that no smoking. I mean, if you smoked in bed, you're dead. So, yeah, we don't think about stuff like that nowadays. We don't even think about it. That doesn't ever enter our mind. But some of these pictures, I like you to kind of look at them. There's this one picture here of the old campground of a lumber mill taken in 1885. And there's a lady standing there with a baby. And the baby lived 96 years, and she died here sometime in about 1969. So this picture goes back to 1885 when the picture was taken. That's what it looked like back then. There is some pictures of the old village of Croton, not much, because I don't know, not when it burned, it burned. There's nothing left. I mean, nobody could save anything. And it must have been a horrible fire, because everything was wood. I mean, that's all they had around here was wood, so.
I had always heard that the fire here was started by the big Chicago fire. Anybody else hear that?
Well, it was Mrs. O'Leary's cow kicked over the lantern down in Chicago, I guess.
Yeah.
Supposedly,
And then
but
the
they said,
embers
"Nah."
flew up here, I heard, and.
Yeah, but I think what this article says that it was started as one of the hotels, one
Oh,
of the shanty hotels, kitchens.
oh,
And it just like that is gone, and the town was gone.
okay.
And, yeah, so and like I said, the people up here on the hill were so disgusted with those people down there in the flats, according to the story that I picked out there. They didn't ring the church bell for help.
Oh,
They just let the fire burn.
oh,
Yeah.
Wow.
Can't hardly imagine that, but I guess that's what it says. So that ended Croton. But now, if you drive across the causeway and look out to your left, you say to yourself, "I'll be a son of a gun." There was a big thriving community out there at one time.
Because of the bars, or why did they not ask for help? No?
Well, the church on this side, maybe the people who lived up here might have been a little different than the people who lived downtown. they were pretty rowdy down there.
The old other side of the tracks.
Yeah, the other side of the tracks, yeah, that's a good one.
When we built the causeway,
Yeah, well, the causeway came later, but they that wasn't really important until they put the dam in, the causeway. And once they put the dam in, well, then they had to get across there.
they built the causeway before the dam?
Well, the causeway was there, a road going around with a little bridge over it. And, but, they didn't have to have a causeway because there was all just a river on this side. Until they put the dam in, and that come up a pond, and there's a pond on this side, so they had to get across, so they put the causeway in.
So just like there's a bunch of buildings underwater?
Well, then most of them were gone.
Yeah.
Yeah, so, matter of fact, I seen a picture dragging a barn out that was saved someplace from underneath where the water is. And they put that barn at the end of the corner right out here on Pine Street, where the house is down there now. And it sat there for, I don't know, 75, 80 years. Then when we got here in the late 70s, heavy snow came and it crushed it and it brought it down, brought the roof down. So we bought the lumber. We had the store over there. We was gonna turn it into a restaurant too, and use that old wood for the siding and for the paneling and stuff. But I still got some of my garage. We never did. And but they have a bunch of old rocks that they use for the foundations for the old barn there.
Right.
So we said, well, we bought the barn. Let's bring the rocks up too. So we brought the rocks up, laid them down along the riverbank there. They got a 200 foot there, so you got a lot of riverbank, and they just sat there for 40 years, and nobody paid any attention to them. So this last year, Joe and Vicki and Joe brought his tractor over, we took all these rocks, stood them all up like that, so they're all standing up there now.
Oh.
And the neighbors go, where'd you get all those rocks at? Geez, they've been there for 40 years, you didn't notice them?
He's giving them all names.
Yeah, and we got them all named, that's our Croton Stonehenge now.
Huh?
Yeah, and we got,
No, carry on.
okay, and they got, two of them over here, they got me dead, they named up there, so, Vicky's folks, and the next big one standing up, they stand up, you go by it sometime, look at it, and, that's my wife, and another one, my first son that died here some years ago, and then, the next one would be my dad, he's in a gravel pit, so he saved some of these stones when they come down the bank, and then the long flat one you sat on, that's my mother. And then the climb, it really surprised you down there, all the trees stopped sticking up and all everything. It just, I don't know how anybody can troll through there with their bait, because there's so much tree. I wouldn't jump off any boat out there, because some of those things are really tall.
That's fascinating.
Good point.
Yeah. But I didn't know anything about the old village then, so I wondered if you even looked, could you see anything down there?
No, I've had divers that would come in the store over there, and they would say that it's just not a good place to dive because there's so much mud and sediment coming down all the time. You can only see about that far in front of you. And once in a while, they see a top of a telephone pole with the bulbs on it, with the things on it there. Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah, that's about all they could. That's all they could see. Yeah. So yeah.
I remember back in the day, the Driftwood used to put a car out on the ice and take bets on when that car would fall in.
Yeah, I remember that.
Did they ever pull them cars out? I've
That's
often
what I know.
wondered.
No. Well, one of the times when Vicki was talking about the lower dam, they did find a car out there, an old, these are bug.
Volkswagen.
Yeah, Volkswagen, bug, yeah.
Out
It's been
front of the
sold
Driftwood?
years and years ago. They took it out,
Jimmy
yeah,
Hoffa was
yeah,
in.
so,
Yeah.
Didn't have to worry about somebody finding them or them. So,
It'd
yeah,
be
there's a lot of
interesting
history around
to,
here. That surprised you. But, yeah, you should, make sure you look at all these pictures you can here. And, some of these things here, they go back to the 1840s. This is an abstract here for my house over there. I didn't know why it's still here, but it goes back, it just shows you where it was, how the house was. And the first guy had it in 1841, that piece of property. In 1854 to 1855, Mitchell bought it. And Mitchell died, and he sold it to Wiggins, and Wiggins sold it to Mitchell. Then Mitchell sold it to Hutchins, then David Rice bought it in 1872.
Wow.
Piece of property, so it all goes, that's all goes together here. Yeah, it's
What
kinda-
about the history of your store?
It was, wasn't nothing there. And
Good
then
question.
all of a sudden, the guy built it about 1911 in that area, just a little place. And there was the house I told you across the street was the old hotel. Well, that was a store also. And then, so they had two stores there. And the other one went out of business eventually. And this one was, yeah, picture of that, Joe?
Yeah,
Is it by the trading post?
It is the trading post. It used
Oh,
to be Croton
This
Michigan.
is the,
Now the trading
that's the
post.
picture of the store when they built it.
oh, I thought,
Back in,
oh.
this was taken in 1920s, someplace in there.
That's where you built your store?
Yeah, that was
Right,
the
the
little.
same-
No, that is the
over there.
store.
That is the
yeah.
trading
Well,
post.
Yeah,
Oh,
yeah,
right, the store.
yeah, this is what it looked like when I
It
got
built
here.
stores. If
This
Croton
one?
Dam
Yeah,
store
this was the
is
first,
that,
this was the
Or,
first owner,
which is
this
now
was
the
one of
trading
the owners, Larry
and
Gregg.
then he built
He
the
had it in the
store,
20s.
which is now
They kept on selling quite a few times.
It's got the same flooring in it, doesn't it?
Okay.
Yeah. But the pictures are quite interesting to see,
They came in
and some of these
76.
guys are,
Okay.
you know, Croton was just a town, but you look at some of these pictures, and some of these people were pretty dapper. Look at Ray Rice and his wife here, Ray Rice there.
Oh, yeah.
That's the brother, that's David Rice. So
They
they
got dressed up for a picture.
Yeah, they were really, this was a nice town at one time. And so. I
So
don't
did
know.
people donate pictures to you? How did you acquire all these
Well,
pictures?
like I said, this Eva Larson and,
Mrs. Kimball.
Mrs. Kimball, they were really interested in it. They were
Oh.
just too old and they wanted my wife, she was very interested in it. But
Okay.
I kept her busy all the time, she didn't have time to.
So when did you say that big school over there was built?
I talked to Art Wells, who's my neighbor, and he said he went to school there. And he's about 78, I think, something like that, in that area. So it was probably built back in the 1920s or
So
before.
they built that one after my school, I wonder, maybe there
Yeah,
wasn't
that
enough,
was the last one they built.
maybe there wasn't enough room at my school for
Yeah.
everybody, and they built that other one.
Yeah, so it was all done.
Mine was a school till the mid-60s, till they,
Mhm.
till they coordinated it with Newaygo
Yeah.
County, there was a coal furnace in the middle, and,
Yeah.
Were you up on
My
Elm
neighbor,
Michigan?
she's still mad.
yeah.
They're still mad because Croton had a lot of money at that time for the school system and so on. And Newaygo didn't have a lot of money, so they incorporated us out here. We voted, but they had the bigger vote, so we become part of Newaygo school system. And of course, all the money and everything went into town, and we're just another area out here now.
That's why I moved up here about 30 years ago. I used to camp up here now. I wanted an old school, and most of them down in Grand Rapids were what I call remodeled.
Yeah,
You
yeah.
couldn't even tell it was a school anymore, but this one, it still had, it wasn't in good shape, but they still had the bell tower and the maple floors and the blackboards and all that, so
Sure.
I got a bell and, kept it
Yeah,
up to date.
you made the old grove school look nice.
Yeah, redid all the
Yeah, sorry about that.
infrastructure. The electricity was scary, those old tube things.
Well, even in my house, every so often you tear out a wall, you see that old spool, the old.
Knob tube.
You had a metal clawfoot tub and a bare bulb with a metal chain in the middle of it. And it was like-
I don't know what time it is.
And tons of marijuana seeds in
Turn
the
this back over to
basement.
Carol here and,
Explains why.
Why don't we, I think there's some cookies left and maybe some coffee we can have, we can kind of call this to, unless somebody's got another question they'd like to ask.
Thank you so much for sharing
Yeah.
that.
When I grew up, my dad was left-handed, and he's some left-handed in a lot of the fire in the family there, and I don't think he liked being left-handed very well. So I got three brothers, and none of us are left-handed, but I think I was supposed to be. So I think whenever I held my left hand, he don't take your right, So I think I become a right-handed, but I read later on that what it does, it bothers you inside, and you get all turned in. I was very shy and very bashful.
Can
when
you
I was
believe
young.
it?
If you asked me a question back then, I stuttered, oh terrible. You asked me a question, it'd take me 5 minutes to answer yes.
Well, the teachers tried to change it from left to right and back
Yes.
down and up.
Well, I do a lot of things left handed, but
Yeah.
I don't bother me anymore. Yeah.
They made the best basketball players, cause they could dribble using with both hands.
Yeah, I was never tall enough for basketball. I could run track, but you gotta run the half mile in 2 minutes, but that's about it.
I have a funny school story from my Oak Grove school, a couple of them.
Where do you guys
One
live?
guy that I talked to,
We
he
live
was in
at
his
White
eighties
House
when I moved in, he said he went to school there and it was the first year it opened, and
White House.
he spit on the floor and the teacher made him go out to the apple tree that's still there and cut a switch, and the switch was too small, so she went and cut her own switch. There used to be a windmill there where the old rod pump was, and a couple of kids took the teacher's car and drove it into the windmill, so. There were delinquents even back then.
I hope you all did enjoy the time we spent together. I hope you all live to be 90.
All right.
Thank you so much.
I'll give you an idea of what the pictures are. Some of them we went through.